Australia's a rich country. We can afford to have whatever we want, and state governments should be able to afford to give you the services that you want. At the moment, they are struggling to do that because they're being shortchanged because the Australian government is not raising enough revenue.
One for mum, one for dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. There's nothing more Aussie than having a whinge about your state government. And fair enough, premiers are always saying they can't afford trivial things, like better hospitals and schools. And in doing so, they're often hoping to lower our expectations. And this is reinforced by those in the media who tell us all the time that state and territory governments are all broke. Dire warnings of state debt tsunamis work to stop voters from demanding the things they need and want. But Australia is a rich country, and so it seems pretty odd that big state governments in particular could be going broke. The truth is they aren't. They're not going broke. They've just been ripped off. And the Goods and Services Tax, or the GST, is at the heart of the problem. And joining me today to tell us why is Australia Institute Research Director Rod Campbell. G'day, Rod.
Hey, Eb.
And Senior Economist Matt Grudnoff. G'day, Matt.
G'day, Eb.
Rod, I'll start with you. Are the state governments going broke?
No, they are not. And if I can join in a bit of intro here, Eb, I want to say, dear listeners, this is possibly the most important podcast you will listen to this year if you're interested in understanding the big picture of politics and policy in Australia. This is the big missing piece for most people.
Okay, so take us through it, Rod. State governments aren't broke. What are they doing?
No, they're not broke. And remember, Australia is one of the richest countries in the world. And so it'd be passing strange if some of the biggest institutions, biggest governments in one of the richest countries in the world were going broke. They're not going broke, but they do have a problem. And that problem is that the money they were promised years ago hasn't turned up. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, of why state governments, they're absolutely not broke, but they are being shortchanged. And that's via the GST system.
And so what were they promised, Rod?
So when the GST came in under the John Howard government, with John Howard and his treasurer, Peter Costello, the GST wasn't popular.
There is no doubt, my fellow Australians, that this country desperately needs a new taxation system.
Oh yeah, it was a near-death experience. We went into the 1998 election with a pretty handy majority and we lost all of it, nearly.
Unsurprisingly, it wasn't popular to say to Australians, how about you pay an extra 10% on the price of almost everything you buy? Nobody wanted to do that. But the way they managed to sell it was to say to the state governments, all of this money will go to you. Not only will you get all the money, but this money will grow because it's on almost everything. As the population grows, as the economy grows, this bucket of money will grow and it will fund all the lovely things that you state governments want. So the states got on board, the Howard government got it over the line, but here's the trick, it didn't happen. It didn't grow and grow, and for reasons we're going to talk about. But yeah, so the states, they're not broke, they get lots of money, but they don't get the money that they were promised.
Okay, so Matt, most of us know the GST because we pay it on almost everything we buy, but can you just explain for maybe people who aren't aware of the specifics, what is it exactly when they introduced it? What's it on and why is it, as Rod said, such an important part of the story here?
Yeah, so the GST is basically what they call a point of sale tax. So you pay it when you buy something, and it's not on everything, but it's on a lot of things. And what it's not on is almost as important as what it's on. because what's happened over time is the stuff that it's not been levelled on, for often very good reasons. So there's very good reasons why some things don't pay GST. They've become more important and we're spending more money on them. So I'll give you a really good example, housing, right? You don't pay any GST on your mortgage repayments and you don't pay any GST on rent. And there are very good reasons for that. We didn't necessarily want to do that. And, certainly I'm not proposing that we change that. But because of the housing crisis, people are spending more and more of their money on things like repayments and rent. And so therefore, because people are spending more of their income on housing, they're spending less on other things that are subject to the GST. And so what's happened is over time is as the economy has grown and as the population's gotten bigger, the amount of revenue collected in GST hasn't kept up with everything else. And it's grown more slowly. Now, at first, states barely noticed it at all, right? The GST was a great new big injection of cash into their budgets. They were able to provide all the really cool services. So one of the problems with the Australian system is that the federal government has all the tax collecting powers and the state governments have lots of the spending power. So states are responsible for things like health and education and other big areas that cost a lot of money, but in the Constitution, they don't have the powers to collect the revenue. So the federal government has to give the states a lot of money.
And so all to the states, John Howard and Peter Costello said this bucket of money for states would grow and grow, but what you're saying is it really hasn't.
No, it hasn't at all. And because it's grown more slowly the state governments have had to cut and cut and cut. And this is the really important thing. Most people don't care about tax policy. They don't care about the GST. But what they do care is about the kind of education their kids are getting, the kind of healthcare that they're getting, and all the other really important things that state governments take care of. Housing, public housing is a state government issue.
Why can't I get a train to the airport, Matt?
Exactly right. Yeah, public transport, all these sort of stuff. And so as the state governments have seen their revenue not rising fast enough just to keep up with the rest of the economy and the population, they've had to cut back and back and back and back. And so what we've seen larger class sizes. We've seen longer hospital waiting lists. We've seen public housing just sort of disappear, basically. And now it's only a tiny percentage of housing. We've seen public transport networks get worse. And this is the real world effects of what's happening here with the GST.
So, Rod, how much are the state governments missing? Is there any calculation there about what their spending capacity would look like if the GST had grown and grown like Peter Costello promised?
Yeah, so we've done these calculations, and when I say we, I really mean Matt. So tell me if I've got this wrong, Matt. But if GST revenue had grown at the same rate as our economy overall or the population, then states would have had an additional $231 billion in revenue over the first 23 years of the GST. So last year, the states and territories would have had an extra $26 billion to spend than what they ended up having. So these are really big numbers. To put them in some kind of context, the budgets of the New South Wales government and the Victorian government, they're all over $100 billion a year. And this is across the whole country. So it's not like a magic wand. It's not, and because it's come up slowly, frog in boiling water kind of thing, the states haven't really noticed, as Matt has said, or at least they haven't been able to mount a strong political case of saying, hey, we're being shortchanged here, we need some change. But this really is affecting their budgets and affecting the kinds of infrastructure they can spend, the levels of debt that they're having to carry, and the things they can spend on different programs. I gave a talk about this to some arts advocates in Victoria a little while ago, and I multiplied it through, and you'd estimate that this would be an extra $100 million in Victoria on arts funding, enough to sort of double the state government funding of the National Gallery of Victoria or something like that. So it wouldn't be revolutionary. It's not like a magic pudding of money, but it's a significant part of what drives tension between states and the federal government, and between state governments and their communities wanting more and better things, and states just not quite being able to fund them in the ways that communities expect. And that's why I say this is so important, because it's behind some of these interactions between communities and state governments, between states and the feds, that drive a lot of the big arguments in Australia around policy, whether it's on NDIS or housing or infrastructure or debts and deficits. At the root of this is state governments not being able to fund what their communities expect, and it's because of this GST shortfall.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, Eb, the NDIS is a great example. We're having a big debate about whether or not the state should shoulder more of the costs of the NDIS. So the federal government is keen to pull back. They say it's growing too fast and that the states need to take on board some of these responsibilities. And the states are going, well, we don't have any money. Right now, what is behind that? Well, behind that is this slow growth in their revenue, this problem that they're having. If it was growing properly, then we could have better funding of NDIS, that the state governments could take on board some of these things. Mental health is another great example, an area that is chronically underfunded and a state responsibility again. Why is it chronically underfunded? Well, in part, it's chronically underfunded because of this lack of revenue growth in the GST.
So, Matt, you've talked about the fact that unaffordable housing has contributed to states being shortchanged. People are paying more on their mortgages and on their rent, which don't attract GST. But that's not where it ends. There's other exemptions from the GST. Sometimes you say they make sense, but others make less sense.
Yep.
What other exemptions are there from the GST, and why is that a problem?
Yeah, so there's other two strong growth areas that make less sense for them being exempt, and that is private health insurance and private school fees. Both of these are growing quite rapidly, and so because they're exempt, it means, as I said before, people are spending more on that and less on other things. But unlike rent and sort of housing, these are actually areas where wealthy people are far more likely to be spending more on things like private health insurance and private school fees. And if we were to unexempt these, one of the biggest problem with the GST is it makes inequality worse. It's what's called a regressive tax. It means that poorer people pay a larger proportion of their income in GST than richer people. If we were to get rid of that exemption for private health insurance and private school fees, that would actually make the GST more progressive because it would be collecting more money from people on higher incomes, wealthier people. So not only would it raise billions of dollars, but it would make the GST less regressive and would make Australia a more equal society.
Can I chuck in another one, Eb, before you jump in? It's sort of obvious when you think about it, but there's no GST on overseas holidays. And there's certainly not GST. We also exempt overseas flights. So if you jump on a first-class flight to London and eat caviar for a week and fly back, you haven't paid a cent in GST. Whereas when I flew the kids to Canberra earlier in the year and we went to Questacon and so on, it was GST all the way.
I didn't actually know that. There you go.
You didn't know I came up to Canberra and didn't look you up.
Well, now
Sorry
I'm offended
about
on two fronts. One, that you didn't visit me, and two, I didn't get a first class ticket GST free to London. No, I didn't know overseas flights or things were exempt.
Yeah, if you take a cruise from your hometown of Nowra to New Caledonia and sip pina coladas and come back, all GST free.
There you go. I'll book it in. So essentially, Matt, richer people are getting a better deal out of this tax system. That's contributing to the states being shortchanged. I guess I'll throw this open to both of you. How do we fix it?
We could basically broaden the GST or increase it. That's often what we hear, particularly from the right, that they think that, well, we need to raise more revenue. But if the GST is making Australia more unequal, then more GST revenue will make us even more unequal. Exempting the few things if we kind of take the exemption off things that mainly wealthy people buy. But more generally, if we just increase it, then that's not going to help. But there's nothing special about the GST. Sometimes people go, well, the GST is a special states tax. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the GST is a states tax. That's just a decision that Howard and the premiers at the time came to, and they decided that, yes, when Howard was going to introduce a GST, would give it all to the states. But we could add other taxes in, right? So it doesn't have to just be the GST that the federal government collects and distributes to the states. For example, if we stuck a 25% export tax, you may have heard of one of these, Ed.
I have indeed.
If we were to stick one of those, a 25% tax on gas exports, we could add that to the pool of money that goes in with the GST, and then all of that $17 billion a year would be distributed out to the states to help fund all this really important spending that state governments have to do.
Yeah. And if I could jump in, like that wouldn't be especially radical in the sense that we already put non-GST money into what's sort of considered the GST bucket of funds that get distributed.
One issue that is not in dispute and never will be, and that is the GST deal for Western Australia. This is a deal that as Treasurer I sponsored, as Prime Minister I legislated. And the one person you can trust any more with this deal is the person who actually brought it about, and that's me. We did it because it was the right thing to do. It was a wrong that needed to be righted in Western Australia. And we were very pleased as a government to both take that initiative, to argue the case and to get it done.
So a few years ago, WA complained really long and hard that it doesn't get enough GST. We can go into why, but let's skate over that for the moment. WA complained that it doesn't get enough GST. The Morrison government listened to them and said, okay, we'll give you more GST. But they didn't make Australians pay more GST. They took money from elsewhere in the budget, from other revenue sources, and they put it into the GST bucket of money so that WA got more GST money, even though it didn't come from GST, and everybody, all the other states, kept getting the same share that they had been getting. So the idea that we could tax gas exports and put that into GST funding to plug this hole that the housing crisis and the GST system have caused, it's actually not without precedent within the GST funding system.
Okay. What are some other ways, Matt, that we could throw more revenue in this bucket?
Yeah, there are lots of different things we can do. So we could introduce a wealth tax. Australia taxes wealth really, really poorly. We don't do a good job at all. Other countries have introduced wealth taxes. If we collected more money from the wealthy, not only, again, would that make Australia a more fair society, but it would also help fund all of this money. We could cut back on fossil fuel subsidies. Fossil fuel subsidies are terrible. Why are they terrible? Because they're costing us money, but also they're turbocharging climate change. They're making climate change worse.
Make mining companies pay fuel tax.
Yeah, exactly right. And then that revenue could be put into the pool that goes to the states. So there's all kinds of different ways we can do. We're only limited by politicians' imaginations. But certainly what we need to acknowledge is that the current system isn't working for states. And often the state premiers get blamed, and sometimes I feel sorry for them. Not very often I feel sorry for politicians, but every now and then you do. Because, honestly, they're constantly having the demands. People want high-quality healthcare and they want to be able to access it when they need it. They don't want to show up to an emergency room and wait 18 hours in order to get a loved one's or themselves important medical care. And so you can absolutely understand why, premiers and state treasurers are copping it big time from the public, saying you're providing a worse service. And at the same time, they don't have the money to be able to provide the quality services that Australians demand. Because Australia, as I said, is a rich country, and we obviously want to demand these high quality services, but they need the revenue in order to be able to do it.
I also think what's really interesting is the way the GST distribution system works. It encourages the states to fight against each other. If you read the submissions that the states make to the Commonwealth Grants Commission, and I'm not suggesting people really do this because it's all it's all pretty dull, but I've done it, so you don't have to. And it's all the states complaining about each other. Whereas what needs to happen is the opposite. The state premiers need to get together and say, we are all being dudded here, and we all want to work together to put more pressure on the federal government to fix this problem. Because if they all band together, then there won't be political disadvantage for any one of them. Whereas right now, in Victoria, we're heading for a state election in November. If our Premier, Jacinta Allen, says, actually, all the problems are because of GST and I'm going to Canberra to demand more money, she'll be absolutely Robinson Crusoe. She'll be hung out to dry, and it'll be her problem, not anybody else's. The same thing for Chris Minns when he faces an election in New South Wales next year, or this is not a party or a state issue. It's the same thing for all of them. So, but they need to unite together rather than the current system of fighting amongst each other. And I think, just while I'm ranting, I think a really interesting parallel happened last week, where the Australian Local Government Association had their annual general meeting. So all of the councils, all of the mayors in Australia got together in Canberra, and they all unanimously said the federal government needs to raise more money for us. They have written to the federal parliament saying the feds need to raise more money to fund local government, to fund roads and parks and local government services, because we don't have the money. And that's really a parallel example of what we're talking about here. The feds raise the money, but they're shortchanging the states and they're shortchanging local governments. And that's driving so many of the problems and conflicts in Australian politics and policy at the moment.
And look, there's an important political angle here too. If all of the states get together, both the Labor and the coalition states, and they go to the federal government and they say, hey, we will back you in. Across party lines, we will back you in on tax reform. That gives the Labor government an opportunity to do things that perhaps they think, well, I can't really do that because I'm worried that, the opposition, the coalition at the federal level will oppose it and I'll get roasted. This is an opportunity for them, for L&P governments to back in this kind of tax reform. And then, Albanese and the federal Labor can say, see, even the coalition support this. So this is a great political opportunity for people who want to be able to do some tax reform, raise some more revenue for the states to get a lot of widespread political support.
Which is exactly what John Howard did. He saw that opportunity that you're describing, and that's exactly what he did. And then after that, set up a system to make sure everybody fought amongst themselves to stop somebody else getting the same opportunity.
All right. So, Rod, I've learnt quite a few things in this conversation. Overseas holidays are GST free, how the states are getting shortchanged. But what do you really want people to understand from this podcast? What's the take-home message that everyone should understand?
The take-home message is that Australia's a rich country. We can afford to have whatever we want, and state governments should be able to afford to give you the services that you want. At the moment, they are struggling to do that because they're being shortchanged, because the Australian government is not raising enough revenue. Whether or not that's from GST or tax on gas or a range of other ways that the Australian government chooses not to raise revenue, that's what's causing the problems for the states. And so as people go to the polls in the next couple of state government elections, I really want people to think about this, that the states aren't broke. Don't believe the hype that the states are going broke and tsunamis of debt and Victorians couldn't possibly have a railway to the airport
and reckless spending.
Yeah, no, don't buy any of that. It's not that there aren't problems. It's not that you can't be critical of some of the policies of state governments, but state governments are under this financial pressure because the federal government doesn't raise enough revenue. Australia is a low tax country. We have some of the lowest levels of tax raised as a portion of our economy in the OECD amongst developed countries. We are down there with like Greece and Chile and the USA in terms of being a low tax country. We are nowhere near the Nordic countries, and we're miles behind Canada, New Zealand, in terms of the amount of tax we raise. And because we don't raise enough tax, we shortchange our states, we shortchange our local governments, and we shortchange the communities that depend on their services.
Thank you for joining us, Rod and Matt.
Thanks, Eb.
Hope you enjoyed a lovely 25 minutes talking about GST, Eb, and listeners.
I couldn't think of a better way to spend 25 minutes, Rod. I did learn a lot, so thank you both.
Well, I know lots of people will be listening to us at about 1.5, 2 times speed, so they probably got through it in about 12.5 minutes.
And if you want to hear more from the Australia Institute, you can check out our new podcast series, What's the Point, with Richard Dennis.
Oh, it's a cracker.
Each week, Australia Institute co-CEO Richard Dennis will cut through the spin and explain political and economic decisions that shape our lives. New episodes drop every Monday afternoon, and you can find the series on YouTube and all your favourite podcast platforms. We'll leave the link in the show notes. This episode was recorded on Tuesday the 7th of July, and some things may have changed since recording. Our theme music is by Jonathan McPeak from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.